Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Saturday, everybody. I hope you're having a restful weekend. I will try to keep today's episode quite light. China's local fiscal pressures is one of the most underreported systemic issues facing the country. A crisis, I would argue, which dwarfs the property crisis. Indeed, the two, like any systemic problem, are connected. As such, local fiscal woes is a topic we have been following very closely on China Update. This week, Hong Kong-based The South China Morning Post published a great piece discussing this very topic, which we should examine. China's plans to issue special government bonds to help local governments get their debts under control as it pushes them to pay their overdue bills gave Edward Zhang, the founder of a technology startup, a glimmer of hope this month because he has been waiting for payment for years, writes the outlet. In 2019, Zhang's tech company was acquired by a state-owned enterprise for millions of yuan. As part of the deal, his team took part in research and development tasks for a local government's smart city project in southern China. But the local government failed to pay the SOE, meaning it lacked the funding to complete the acquisition. Zhang told the outlet, quote, "Those smart city projects were the most important business segment for each local government at the time, with tens of billions of yuan invested in each across the country." End quote. However, the outlet explains, following the emergence of the pandemic, many smart city projects began to default on payments to downstream companies, and the one Zhang's team was working on laid off 30% of its staff. Zhang's plight is just a small glimpse into a larger picture. Over the past few decades, as Beijing pursued economic growth, local governments played a crucial role. They financed major projects through local government financing platforms to meet growth targets. Over time, they also accumulated massive levels of debt and began defaulting on payments to suppliers. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, China's local government debt had reached 92 trillion yuan, $12.9 trillion by 2022, equivalent to 76% of that year's gross domestic product. After 2 lawsuits, Zhang had recovered about 1/3 of the acquisition money he was supposed to receive. Explaining once again to the outlet, quote, "It's very common for local governments to default on payments to businesses when a lot of projects are being abandoned halfway," end quote, adding, quote, "But they are the ones in power, and we can't do anything about it, and they can only turn to other industries," end quote. Li Daokui, a professor at Tsinghua University and a government policy advisor, described local government's arrears in accounts payable to enterprises as, quote, "shocking," end quote, in an interview in mid-October, saying they owed companies and employers an amount equivalent to 10% of GDP. That delay in payments is a key reason consumers are not spending, Lee said, because they are simply not getting paid. He said local governments must make paying back their debts a priority rather than launching new infrastructure projects. Most local governments have changed their leadership, and they have little incentive to actually repay their predecessors' arrears, explains the outlet. Private enterprises are waiting cautiously to see how effective those policies are, citing previous cases of inconsistent implementation at the local level. Zhang said it is essential to ensure the bonds are used to pay off existing arrears, rather than propping up projects by the new leaders of local governments. Jay Feng, a subcontractor for a state-owned power grid and property developers in Guangdong province, told the South China Morning Post the central authorities' policies were always good, but they could never be enforced on the ground, quote, "at least in solving deep and crippling local debts," end quote. Adding, quote, "I hope that this time the scale of the bonds might be large enough to hold local departments accountable to repay SMEs like us," end quote. Okay, now before we move on to the next story, I have a huge favor to ask. If you're getting some value from today's episode, that is just hit the like button, and if you have not done so already, subscribe. Sharing is also a tremendous help. Thank you very much. Next up, UK-based The Financial Times reports that Wei, a top government advisor who in 2022 wrote an essay in which he said, quote, "China cannot be tied to Putin and needs to be cut off as soon as possible," end quote, we actually discussed this at the time, was forced to retire early from his job. The Financial Times writes that 2 people familiar with the matter said this month that Hu, whose commentary had been featured extensively in international media, was forced to retire from the Shanghai Party Institute of the Communist Party, a school for officials, last year at the age of 59. Quote, "This was considered early for such a prominent scholar who once advised the country's top leaders." End quote. The outlet adds that Hu, quote, "is one of a growing number of scholars targeted in recent years as the Communist Party under Xi tightens its grip on academia." End quote. The crackdown has targeted Chinese intellectuals overseas as well as those working within the country, muzzling public discussion of not only traditionally sensitive topics such as politics and international relations, but also China's struggling economy. In Hu's case, quote, "his agreement to step down from the Shanghai Institute had allowed him a soft landing," one person familiar with the situation said, in that he had avoided jail and was still able to attend public events. End quote. Let us re-examine what Hu wrote back in March of 2022. This is from one of his prominent pieces criticizing Beijing's then foreign policy to support Putin's war in Ukraine. Quote, "China cannot be tied to Putin and needs to be cut off as soon as possible, in the sense that an escalation of conflict between Russia and the West helps divert US attention from China. China should rejoice with and even support Putin, but only if Russia does not fall. Being in the same boat with Putin will impact China should he lose power. Unless Putin can secure victory with China's backing, a prospect which looks bleak at the moment, China does not have the clout to back Russia. The law of international politics says there are no eternal allies nor perpetual enemies, but our interests are eternal and perpetual. Under current international circumstances, China can only proceed by safeguarding its own best interests, choosing the lesser of two evils, and unloading the burden of Russia as soon as possible. At present, it is estimated that there is still a window period of 1 or 2 weeks before China loses its wiggle room. China must act decisively." End quote. Now, let us end with this observation from veteran China analyst Bill Bishop. Quote, "At the time, Hu's essay was seen by those who still wanted to believe Xi had not picked sides as evidence that there was real tolerated debate. Clearly the side has been picked, and being on the wrong side of that choice is career limiting." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. I tried to keep today's episode a little bit shorter. I find that on the weekend, the feedback I've received from you is that you prefer the shorter episodes. I, in the past, have produced quite long ones looking at foreign policy and ideology. I'd be very much interested in your feedback. Do you want these shorter episodes on the weekend or longer, deeper dive episodes? I've also been considering reducing the number of episodes per week from 6 down to 5, maybe taking a Wednesday or a Thursday off. This is because it appears that viewership by the time it gets to about Wednesday or Thursday drops off and then picks back up on Friday and Saturday. So perhaps there is a level of fatigue covering China Update developments every day. So I would also like to hear whether you'd like to see me reduce the number from 6 to 5 per week. So let me know your thoughts on these, as well as what we covered in today's episode, in the comments below. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Like I said, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great weekend, a restful weekend, and I will see you all back for more China Update on Monday.